cancer, and that people at a young age are particularly vulnerable to skin damage from ultraviolet radiation. So putting the two things together, it's sort of a no-brainer, really, to try and protect children in primary schools. And hats are a very good way of doing this, for part of the body anyway.
Right. And if we weigh up other issues, we actually got an email from a GP earlier, Tony, who said, look, let's weigh up the risk. There is an epidemic of vitamin D deficiency in South Auckland and brown and black kids, said this doctor working in the area. I don't know what you make of that.
I don't think that is actually correct. And the thing I was also point out is that the hat protection policies, the sun protection policies for schools actually only operate during terms 1 and 4, which is during the peak of the UV season. So they don't encourage necessarily the wearing of those same hats outside that period of time when the risk is highest. And they also, of course, don't apply to weekends and out-of-school hours.
Oh, yes.
And so on. So there's plenty of opportunity for people to get adequate sun exposure.
Just finally, were you surprised that there wasn't a uniform blanket, no hat, play in the shade policy in more schools? It's pretty simple, isn't it? And this 43%.
Yes, that's disappointing. But the good news is from our survey is that we analysed what could be done to improve this. And we looked at the two possibilities. One is membership of the Sun Smart Schools program, which is run by the Cancer Society. And the other is using a professional drafting policy service, which is available in New Zealand on a commercial basis. And we put those two factors into statistical modelling, and we found that each of them were very good predictors of policy rigour. So clearly there's two things there that we could encourage. Membership of the Sun Smart Schools program and also the use of the policy drafting service. The latter, of course, has a cost, and that can be a barrier to schools. So we would suggest that somehow or other, through the Ministry of Education or Ministry of Health, that perhaps they would like to subsidise that process so that we could get the best quality, the best possible policies, and that they could be updated and, can be tweaked also for a local situation, like people further north might have slightly different ones to people in the south.
Well, let's see how we get on with this particular issue. Very interesting. Associate Professor Tony Reader there from Otago University. Interesting. It's a fairly simple policy to enact, but really 43% of schools had optimum policies in place.
I was really surprised about that. And
it's a no-brainer, isn't it? You put on your hat.
It is, but I guess it's a function of what it identified, which was new people coming in, not being aware there wasn't a policy in place. Probably if you asked a lot of those principals who may have been new to the school, they would just assume those policies were there.
Yeah. I'm surprised that you didn't say it was parental responsibility, Michelle.
Well, I think it is parental responsibility, but in recent years, the schools have very much taken that on board themselves. Yeah. And that's fair enough.
Yeah, also, I think the issue that people deal with is shoes on the kids' feet in the winter and food in their stomach. It's a bit of a middle-class sort of luxury for many people. That's the reality of it. And why do my kids' hats cost $55?
There you go.
Because they're into brands.
Yeah.
Shane Tepo, Michelle Bogue, thank you so much for being with me on the panel. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, see you.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei. Air New Zealand is set to give returning Kiwis the cold shoulder with a 3-week booking freeze to take the pressure off managed isolation facilities. There's a new storm brewing over the future of Auckland Port, 2 conflicting reports, and 2 ministers at loggerheads over the quality of those reports. Chaos, confusion and congestion. Hundreds of thousands of Aussies are bracing for the COVID-containing border closure. And teenage killer Hami Hanara is still on the run. The former partner of his murder victim is pleading with him to turn himself in. $265 million for sport. The Finance and Sport Minister reaches into his kitty. And we've got another story about a kitty too. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The government's been forced to slow the number of New Zealanders coming into the country, but says it's trying to roll out more isolation hotels as fast as possible. Air New Zealand has agreed to put a halt on new bookings for 3 weeks to take the pressure off managed isolation facilities. It's expected to affect thousands of travellers trying to get home over the coming weeks. Jacinda Ardern says the freeze will help control the flow of people in what can be a highly volatile situation.
We have people showing up at airports, and it's by the time they close the doors, that's when we'll get a heads up that we have an extra 100 people coming that weren't planned for.
The Health Minister hasn't ruled out using cruise ships to isolate the increasing number of people returning. Most of the beds at managed isolation facilities across the country are in use, with just under 600 available out of almost 6,400. Chris Hipkins was asked if the government is considering using cruise ships to boost the number of available beds.
I think everything's on the table at this point, as long as it meets the relevant criteria.
Chris Hipkins. Meanwhile, 2 new cases of the coronavirus have been reported today, bringing the number of active cases in the country to 22. A former partner of a murdered Flaxmere man is urging his killer to hand himself in. 16-year-old Hami Hanara fatally stabbed Kelly Donna in 2018 and has been on the run from the youth justice facility Korowai Manaki since Saturday. Jocelyn Peachy, who had a child with Mr Donna, says it's time for Hanara to do the right thing.
Hand yourself in. You're not just hurting us, but you're hurting your own family. I don't hold his family accountable at all for what happened. Hami was responsible for his actions and his actions alone.
Jocelyn Peachy says she wants to know how Hanara and his accomplice Sean Ratu managed to escape. Labour and New Zealand First are at loggerheads over the future of Ports of Auckland. A report released today recommends moving the port to Manukau or the Firth of Thames, unlike a previous report recommending a move to Northland. New Zealand First are in favour of a move to Marsden Point, but the Transport Minister and senior Labour MP Phil Twyford has allied with the Mayor of Auckland, Phil Goff, who's calling the previous Northport work a shoddy opinion piece.
My view is that the Wayne Brown study had a clearly predetermined outcome, and I think that the Sapir report today identifies a number of flaws with it. And this is such an important decision for New Zealand that we've got to get it right.
Phil Twyford. Wayne Brown, who chaired the Northport Option Working Group, says the criticism is unfair. Preparations are underway in the Australian state of New South Wales to close its border later today with Victoria, which is battling a spike of COVID-19 infections in the city of Melbourne. Police and the Army are being sent to patrol more than 50 roads straddling the border, used by thousands every day. There's a stringent permit system allowing people to enter Victoria, and anyone caught breaking the rules faces a big fine and imprisonment. Victoria recorded another record daily high in new coronavirus cases today, 191. And Australian media are reporting the Premier is considering imposing a 4-week lockdown. The Prime Minister says it's not her place to decide if Sujong Ki should apologise over false claims that jihadi brides were leaving New Zealand for ISIS in 2015. The Islamic Women's Council says the later disproven comment to the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee led to a spike in hostility towards the Muslim community. The Council has renewed calls that Mr Ki should publicly apologise, having released its submission to the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the March attacks today. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's not up to her to decide if Sir John should say sorry.
That's not a judgment I can make. Only individuals, I think, who are being asked can make that judgment. So I would leave that for Mr Ki.
Jacinda Ardern. RNZ has contacted Sir John for a response. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 5. The former All Whites goalkeeper Jake Gleeson is suing 2 Major League Soccer doctors from his former club, claiming they are responsible for prematurely ending his MLS career. The 30-year-old Gleeson played for Portland between 2011 and 2018 before suffering shin pain in both legs. The Oregonian newspaper says the $15 million lawsuit alleges 2 physicians were medically negligent in selecting a risky procedure to repair stress fractures, failed to properly sterilise metal implants inserted in his leg, and failed to remove an implant when Gleeson suffered an infection. Gleeson told the Oregonian he's in constant pain and battles depression, anxiety and panic attacks.
I've had the job that I loved more than anything taken from me, and a big aspect of my life taken from me. I'm physically not the same. I'm emotionally not the same. I just would like to understand why and how someone could do this.
Former All Whites goalkeeper Jake Gleeson. Basketball, netball, rugby and rugby league are among a range of sports which will now be able to hold national competitions that were previously under threat. The government has allocated the first tranche of funding from its $265 million sport recovery package, which was announced in the budget in May. $5.5 million has been made available to fund the likes of the Mitre 10 Cup rugby competition, the Farah Palmer Cup, basketball's national leagues for men's and women, the National Ice Hockey League and netball's provincial competition. That's the news.
Locked out.
She's applying to come to New Zealand and they're claiming she's already living here when they clearly see that she went back on the 23rd of February and hasn't been able to come back since.
Locked in.
Victoria will basically be an island within an island. No one can leave Victoria to go to virtually any other state.
Unlocked.
At the Louvre today, it reminded me of my childhood. Not that many people around.
Lock it in. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Showers, some heavy with possible squally thunderstorms tomorrow, easing in the evening. Gale westerlies for a time tomorrow from Auckland to Waitomo and Western Bay of Plenty. For the remainder of the North Island, showers mainly west of the ranges. Rain spreading north tomorrow with snow lowering to 700 metres inland and some heavy falls about the east coast. Easing to a few showers by evening, but showers remaining persistent about the Wairarapa coast. For Bulla, Westland, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, occasional showers, gradually clearing tomorrow but persistent about Banks Peninsula. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, showers possibly heavy at times, snow to 300 metres for a time overnight. And Chatham Islands, rain, easing to a few showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The departure lounge for Kiwis wanting to return home just got a whole lot bigger. The government put a freeze on booking any more flights home, and we'll hear from Air New Zealand's CEO, Greg Foran, in just a few minutes. But we begin with a developing story involving two conflicting reports and two ministers at loggerheads over the future location of the Port of Auckland. The first report, led by Wayne Brown and released last year, favoured moving the port to Marsden Point, a position New Zealand First has long held. The second, released today, favours the Manukau Harbour. Transport Minister and Senior Labour MP Phil Twyford today joined forces with his former colleague and Auckland Mayor Phil Goff, saying the Brown report had a predetermined outcome and was overseen by New Zealand First MP Shane Jones. Shane Jones disputes this. He says any suggestion the outcome of the report was predetermined is disrespectful. Joe Moyer and Mackenzie Smith have more.
The Sapir Research Group report released today has put forward Manukau and the Firth of Thames as the only two viable options for the port. Phil Goff has given it his backing. He says a previous report commissioned by Cabinet and overseen by Associate Transport Minister and New Zealand First MP Shane Jones was a shoddy and baseless opinion piece. Mr Twyford says the report, led by Chair Wayne Brown, had a predetermined outcome in favour of moving the port to Marsden Point.
Yeah, I do. I think that's exactly what happened. And frankly, that's not good enough for a multi-billion-dollar investment that will have a critical impact on the economic efficiency of our supply chain and have big environmental consequences.
Mr Twyford says today's report is a useful contribution to the debate.
My view is that the Wayne Brown study had a clearly predetermined outcome, and I think that the Sapir report today identifies a number of flaws with it. And this is such an important decision for New Zealand that we've got to get it right.
He says the Wayne Brown report raised more questions than answers.
It was done with the blessing of Cabinet. But when the final report was produced, Cabinet decided that it left a number of key questions unanswered and it wanted more work done. And that's why we've ended up with the report we released today.
Mr Goff says Mr Brown's report was one of the least professional reports he's seen in his 40-year political career.
It was not professional. It was not evidence-driven. It did not produce a good business case. It did not consult properly. And in the end, it was so unprofessional that it leaked its own report before it gave it to its stakeholders.
Wayne Brown, who chaired the group considering the future of the Upper North Island's ports and logistics last year, is standing by his work. He's rubbishing the Sapir report.
I had guys from roading, trucking, trains, shipping, engineering and infrastructure. They have health economists. And they did it without consulting the public or any contact with our group. It's a joke.
The Prime Minister says her position remains that the Auckland CBD is not the right place for the port in the long term. Jacinda Ardern says it will be up to whoever forms the next government to decide.
These aren't decisions that have to be made tomorrow, but for the long-term future of the Auckland CBD and indeed whichever region the port lives in, these decisions do need to be made in good time.
Opposition leader Todd Muller wouldn't give his preferred option for the port. The chief executive of the Road Transport Forum, Nick Leggett, says the Sapir report has proven Northland was a vanity project.
There's been a lot of talk about the fact that siting the port in Northland would increase economic activity there. But actually the report says that most of the gains would be felt in regions outside of where the rise in activity takes place.
Infrastructure New Zealand Chief Executive Paul Blair wants the Infrastructure Commission to take over the process. He says it's been overly politicised.
Both of these studies were done in record time, which is good, but these are complex decisions that affect lots of parties, and I think that there is a need to bring people along for the ride on that decision process.
The government says more analysis of port options will be needed next year. For Checkpoint, Mackenzie Smith.
OK, so what does Shane Jones have to say?
I don't want to comment on anything that Mr Twyford has said because my leader expects me to act with class. I would say in respect of Phil Goff the following. 200 years of shipping has led the industry to the East Coast. Phil Goff and this most recent report want us to come into the Manukau harbour against any advice from the shipping industry, presumably to dock near the Mangere sewage pond, where I suggest he start transforming and converting that water into his new source of drinking water.
Did this report have a predetermined outcome? The Brown report.
I want to be absolutely clear here. This report derived its mandate from the coalition agreement. We are talking about the coalition agreement, which is why I will not respond publicly to anything attributed to Mr Twyford. That report was assembled by some of the finest minds dealing with logistics in New Zealand, including the CEO of KiwiRail. The report showed an engagement with over 80 stakeholders, all skilled in port logistics, transport logistics, integrated logistics. Any suggestion that it was written on the back of a cigarette paper, I think is grossly disrespectful to the minds that contributed to the report and overlooks the fact that this report was agreed to through the coalition agreement. That's how it derived its mandate to proceed.
Nobody is questioning whether the coalition agreed to this report or not. They say they did. What is in question here is the quality of the report. Do you categorically deny that the outcome of where the port should go was predetermined?
Let me be crystal clear here. I am a New Zealand First politician who is going to campaign for port restructuring and the relocation of lots of economic activity from the ports of Auckland to Northport. I am not going to hide from that. But
did you tell Mr Brown that that is what you wanted the outcome of the report to be?
Mr Brown and his experts came to their own conclusions, but don't for a moment think that as a New Zealand First politician, I have not campaigned on that outcome. My leader and I are on record of that, and it would be, quite frankly, evasive not to admit that.
But those are two different things, aren't they? Stating publicly that you would like this to happen, that you're all for industry moving to Northland, is different to a report which is supposed to be independent, having a predetermined outcome. So, did you have any discussions with Mr. Brown about what you would like the outcome of the report to be?
Mr. Brown and his fellow panellists undertook, for the cost of $700,000 or $800,000, 50% of what we've wasted on this other report. That takes us into the Manukau Harbour near the Mangere sewage ponds. They made their own judgment. These are very strong, independent New Zealanders, and any suggestion that they were coward because of the New Zealand First political position is, quite frankly, mischief-making.
Just before you go, Minister, you stand by this Brown report? Absolutely, 100%.
The Wayne Brown report was not only robust, not only affordable, but over time it will be seen to have been very prescient, and it will be the platform that influences the future shape and form of port activity between Tauranga, Auckland and Northland.
And that was New Zealand First MP Shane Jones, who's also the Associate Transport Minister there. It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's hard to know what port to shelter in that political storm. Let us know what you think. Where should the port go? Stay where it is, move up to Northland, or is Manukau the best option? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Air New Zealand hasn't ruled out the possibility of extending a 3-week freeze on bookings for passengers wanting to come home to New Zealand so the government can cope with increasing demand on isolation facilities. There's a capacity for 6,849 people in 26 managed isolation and quarantine facilities across 5 cities. But pressure is going on those resources, and Minister Megan Woods says the system can't purely be demand-driven. Emirates and Singapore Airlines are also being asked to stop taking bookings over the same time period. After the hiatus, the government wants Air New Zealand to match its daily arrivals according to beds available in isolation. The national carrier says it will need to contact some passengers travelling in the next 3 weeks to move their bookings because of isolation capacity constraints. I asked Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran why he agreed to the 3-week booking freeze.
It's pretty simple, Lisa. I was asked to do that to help the New Zealand government, who's a pretty important partner of ours across all aspects, as they're dealing with managed isolation. And as I think about that request and I think about what's right for New Zealand, I think it's a pretty simple decision for us to get in there and provide the right support.
So was the only obligation on you an ethical one in your view? There was no legal obligation? There was no way they could compel you?
Totally ethical, Lisa. I generally go back to principles, and doing what's right is a pretty important one as far as I'm concerned. And we've all seen some of the challenges, that Minister Woods is dealing with here. 7,000 odd people in managed isolation. The numbers pretty significant, and I think we've got a role to play here, as have all the other airlines, to help us manage the situation just for a short period of time, and then we'll work out a solution from there.
You say just for a short period of time. How convinced are you it's only going to be 3 weeks? Did they ask for 3 weeks from you, or did they ask for a bit more?
No, we had a good discussion over the weekend, and we were talking between 2 and 3 weeks. So to give ourselves a bit of breathing room, we said 3, but that's a number that we'll look at over a period of time. And we may have to look at other solutions around that, because there's a lot of New Zealanders who live overseas who are obviously looking at coming home, and managing that through, if you like, the entire supply chain is important here. But, that's how we ended up at 3.
So it could be longer than 3 weeks. The door is open.
Possibly. It's something we're reviewing. We know that next week loads are okay. We may need to have a chat with some passengers the week after and see whether some might be prepared to change some days of travel. But, it will be sort of looked at day by day across all the teams, and we'll come up with the right answer.
So how many passengers do you think you might have to offload?
Look, I don't have that number directly in front of me. I can tell you that, we're probably going to see about 5,000 people travel over the next 3 weeks. And in the days that, as best we can tell, that we may be running a bit over capacity, we're not talking hundreds, we're just talking a few here and there. And of course, some of this gets influenced by folk who have booked but then don't actually turn up to travel on that day. So, it's a reasonably complex situation we're dealing with here, and numbers do move around a bit, but we're not talking lots and lots of people.
So Emirates and Singapore are also carrying passengers into New Zealand, and as far as we can tell, they've yet to agree to this at the moment. How could that disadvantage you if they don't agree to do exactly what you're doing?
Well, I'm confident they will agree, Lisa, and the conversations I've been having with the folk down in Wellington is that people are going to get in here and do what's right, and I'm confident that they will, and we'll all end up in the right position here.
And if they don't do the right thing, that's a disadvantage, isn't it? Because your customers can just get on one of their flights.
Well, as I said, I'm confident they will do the right thing.
How much revenue are you foregoing by agreeing to this?
Well, the question is, are you foregoing some of the revenue, or are you just putting it back to a later date? And the answer is probably the latter rather than the former. I think these people will still travel. It's just that instead of doing it in the next 3 weeks, they might do it in the 4th week or the 6th week or whatever. Regardless, we'll keep an eye on that and make sure that we end up on the right side of the ledger for all parties concerned.
So, given the numbers that you've seen, are you absolutely sure that this is necessary?
I'm absolutely sure, based on the discussions that I've been having over the last week, this is absolutely necessary.
So after the freeze, the Minister says she's going to talk to you about managing numbers of incoming passengers to align, as she puts it, with isolation availability. So how will that work? Will you have a number of passengers you're allowed to bring in every day? Will you have limits that are placed on you?
Some of those discussions are ongoing at the moment, and we've been party to those, Lisa, and, at a high level, that fundamentally is likely to be the case.
So capacity limits are likely to be the case?
Possibly.
And what kind of numbers are they talking about here?
Look, that's a question that you would want to have with the Minister in terms of what she's aiming for in terms of managed isolation.
But what are they telling you in terms of limitations that they may be putting on passenger numbers?
Well, I know at the moment they're working to a number around 7,000, Lisa, and they'll have to decide whether they want to stay at that number or move it.
And what do you think? Should they? Because it is a handbrake on your business if they don't.
Well, it's really a discussion for them. They've got the responsibility of managing the border. Our job is to move people around, and they've got a responsibility to Greater New Zealand around this, and we'll work with them.
So are you saying that, you don't have an opinion on it, when in effect it could, really limit the amount of business that you can do? And I'm sure at the moment, with the way things are, every bit of revenue counts for Air New Zealand, doesn't it?
Well, revenue is important, Lisa, but as I said, a lot of these people are likely to still travel. It's just they mightn't travel next week or the week after. They might do it in a couple of weeks' time. But certainly for the next interim period, we're limiting, or in fact doing no sales for the next 3 weeks.
So all the talk of this Trans-Tasman bubble, are you convinced it's going to happen before the end of the year? Are you planning on it happening?
Our forecasts do indicate that we would be back flying. However, a forecast is a forecast. I certainly had a different view of the Tasman 5 weeks ago to what I've got today, but I do think and would really be hopeful that we were up and running before the end of the year.
And by that you mean with travel that doesn't require a quarantine back and forward to Australia?
Wouldn't that be terrific?
What makes you so confident it might happen?
I know there's lots of people in this country that would love to go there, and there's even more Australians that would like to come here.
What gives you confidence that it will happen before the end of the year?
Well, I think we've got two governments and two nations that are close in terms of their thinking and how they want to operate. And I think there's a lot of benefits for everyone concerned if we can get that bubble up and operating.
Would you be happy to go to the islands first?
I'm actually ambivalent as to where we go. I'd like to do both, to be honest with you, and I think once we do one, we can work out how to do the other one quite quickly.
Hey, I see you were working on a flight recently. What were you doing?
Well, generally I try and get out at least once or twice a week and get around the country and meet the crew and get around the airports and see what's happening. So usually when I'm on a flight, I'll take the opportunity to get up and help the flight attendants.
So what job specifically were you doing on board?
Well, generally I'm up there serving tea or coffee or water and a cookie or the corn chips, and whether we're on a jet or an ATR. And I enjoy getting out and about and talking to our staff and talking to our customers. And I'd have to tell you that I'm really impressed with the job that our staff do. It's a tough gig at the moment in Air New Zealand, particularly as we're dealing with COVID-19 and a number of our crew still travelling overseas and, having to deal with COVID testing and all the other things. So anything I can do to support them is really important.
So you're behind the snack cart then, eh? What's your pitch when you come up to the passengers? What do you say?
Good afternoon, madam. Would you like coffee, tea or water? And would you like a snack? So I've got that down pat. And so far, I've been fortunate, not too many bumpy flights, and I've been able to keep everything where it should be, and haven't spilt anything on anyone.
And the snack options, what are they?
Well, a cookie or the corn chips, and then of course towards the end of the flight, I sometimes get to do the lolly run.
Wow, that's a privilege.
It is. I did have to give it up on the flight yesterday to Christchurch. There was a young boy on the plane who superseded me and frankly did a better job and clearly has done it before.
And that was Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran. Now, Megan Woods' office has confirmed that New Zealand officials are already speaking to Emirates and Singapore Airlines about freezing bookings to New Zealand. And the Minister's office also says there's been no commercial agreement or inducement for Air New Zealand to put that freeze on for 3 weeks. Now, in breaking news, Hamish Walker, the National MP for Clutha Southland, has issued a statement. It is headed up a personal statement and an apology. And it reads, I have spoken to National Party leader Todd Muller and informed him that I passed to members of the media by email information containing COVID-19 patient details that were given to me by a source. It goes on to say, I did this to expose the government's shortcomings so they would be rectified. It was never intended that the personal details would be made public, and they have not been, either by me or the persons I forwarded them to. I have received legal advice that I have not committed any criminal offence. The information that I received was not password protected by the government. It was not stored on a secure system where authorised people needed to log on. There was no redaction to protect patient details and no confidentiality statement on the document. By exposing a significant privacy issue, I hope the government will improve its protocols and get its safeguards right. I made serious allegations about the government's COVID-19 response and passed on this information to prove those allegations. It goes on to say, I sincerely apologise for how I have handled this information and to the individuals impacted by this. I will be fully cooperating with the Michael Heron QC inquiry. And that is a statement from Hamish Walker, the National MP for Clutha in Southland, about those leaked COVID-19 patient details. And as you will know, Chris Hipkins, the Minister, appointed Michael Heron QC to lead the inquiry into where that leak came from, and that just in from Hamish Walker. We'll bring you more information as it comes to hand. The former partner of murdered Flaxmere man, Kelly Donna, is urging his killer to give himself up. Hami Hanara was 14 when he fatally killed Mr Donna and is tonight still on the run after escaping the youth justice facility Korowai Manaki on Saturday night. Jocelyn Peachy says Hanara's actions are hurting everyone and it's time to take responsibility. Katie Doyle reports.
Hand yourself in. You're not just hurting us, but you're hurting your own family.
Hami Hanara was serving a life sentence for murdering Kelly Donna when last Saturday night he broke out of Korowai Manaki in Auckland. Hanara and 17-year-old Sean Ratu escaped through a reinforced window just after 8 o'clock before crossing the roof and breaking out through the staff car park. It wasn't until 9:30, an hour and a half later, that staff realised the boys were missing. After searching the grounds, staff alerted police, beginning what is now a 3-day search. Jocelyn Peachy had a child with Kelly Donna, and the couple stayed friends even after they separated.
I'm gutted, shattered. My emotions are just all over the place because all my feelings are resurfacing when I tried to put them to rest and try and move on in life. But then something like this happens and it just reopens all those old wounds.
Miss Peachy says it's time Hanara hand himself in. She says he's hurting everyone by evading police, and it simply isn't fair.
You're not just hurting us, but you're hurting your own family. I don't hold his family accountable at all for what happened. Hami was responsible for his actions and his actions alone. I never got a chance to get that out at the time, but I just wanted them to know that.
Also front of mind is how Hanara and Ratu were able to escape. Ms Peachy says she wants answers and she'll be following up with police and Oranga Tamariki personally.
How did he manage to get out of a fully staffed facility? There should be questions around that.
Oranga Tamariki says it is investigating how the teenagers managed to escape. It says while neither teenager had broken out of a residence in the past, Sean Ratu had previously absconded from a community-based placement. Police are continuing to actively search for the pair across multiple districts and say it is only a matter of time before they are found. They warn neither should be approached. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, yet more breaking news. Melbourne has been ordered into Stage 3 lockdown from tomorrow night for 6 weeks. That news from Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews. It's come as 191 more cases of COVID-19 were identified in Victoria today. The 4,500-kilometre border with New South Wales officially closes at midnight. So that news again, the whole of Melbourne goes into lockdown. And that is 5 million people who will be confined to their homes for the next 6 weeks. The Southern DHB pushes for Dunedin and Invercargill to be used for managed isolation before Queenstown. And last night a listener called Keith got in touch with us by text asking if there was any good stories happening in the world. Well, we think we finally found one, so stay tuned, Keith. We'll bring it to you. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. The port, Auckland Port, should it go to Manukau or Marsden Point? And what about the news that Hamish Walker has basically confessed to leaking the COVID-19 patient details that he received from a source, he says. Do get in touch. Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email. checkpoint@rnz.co.nz is the email address. Let's finally get to the headlines with Susanna.
The head of Air New Zealand says putting a hold on inbound flights for 3 weeks was a simple decision to make. Greg Foran told Checkpoint it was the right thing to do to help support the country's managed isolation system. Thousands of New Zealanders wanting to return home are expected to be affected by the freeze. A Queenstown hotel owner is backing calls for Dunedin and Invercargill to be used for managed isolation ahead of Queenstown. Last week, the government announced it was looking at the resort town and Dunedin as potential destinations for such facilities. Mark Rose from the Reese Hotel says Queenstown doesn't have the hospital capacity. The MP for Regional Economic Development says any suggestion the outcome of a report recommending Ports of Auckland move to Northland was predetermined. It's disrespectful. A new report released today says only Manukau and the Firth of Thames would have the long-term capacity for a port. And Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff has given the study his backing. Shane Jones told Checkpoint the previous report was robust and affordable. Some temporary workers have been given more time to live and work in New Zealand. The government has extended all essential skills and work to residence visas that are due to expire by the end of this year by a further 6 months. Low-skilled workers on 3-year visas will get the same extension. The former partner of murdered Flaxmere man Kelly Donner is urging his killer to hand himself in. Hami Hanara was 14 when he fatally stabbed Mr Donner and has been on the run from the youth justice facility Korowai Manaki since Saturday. Jocelyn Peachy says he's hurting everyone. New South Wales is preparing to close its border later today with Victoria, which is battling a spike of COVID-19 infections in Melbourne. The state recorded 191 new cases today, another record daily high, and Melbourne has been ordered into a stage 3 lockdown from tomorrow night for 6 weeks. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And just an update on that breaking news. Hamish Walker, the National MP for Clutha Southland, has just issued a statement and an apology admitting that he is the person who passed to media information of COVID-19 patients, including their details. He has said they were given to him by a source, and he has apologised for now doing that, said he wanted to highlight inadequacies in the security settings for that information. Todd Muller, National Party leader, has just released a statement on Hamish Walker. It says the following. Hamish Walker has informed me that he received and then disclosed health information regarding active COVID-19 cases to members of the media. I have asked Hamish to acknowledge this to Michael Heron QC and cooperate fully with his inquiry into how the information made it into the public domain. I have expressed to Hamish my view that forwarding on this information was an error of judgment. While I wait for the result of the inquiry, I have transferred his forestry, land information and associate tourism portfolio responsibilities to Ian McKelvey. We would love to talk to Todd Muller. We'll try and get in touch with him about that developing situation. It is time now, though, for the business news with Nona Peltier. Nona, now, I know we're going to talk about this immigration story that you were telling us about yesterday, right? So there's been some developments. What's going on?
Yeah, the Minister announced today that he is going to extend the visas of a couple of classes of workers on visas that are to expire this year. So if your visa expires this year, you're going to get an extra 6 months if you are on an essential skills visa or one of those employer-assisted visas where you're sponsored by an employer. And or if you are on one of those visas where you've been here for 3 years and you need to leave the country for a year, so you'll get an extension as well if you're on that type of visa of 6 months. Now, everybody else, though, so this affects, 16,500 people on those essential skills and work employer-assisted visas. That's a 16,500 number. Another 600 on that other visa, which is the one where you get the stand down for 1 year. But there are about 200,000 people working in New Zealand on temporary visas. And for those people, they are not getting an extension. They are going to be treated individually, and they're going to need to reapply if they want to stay in the country one by one. And if they can't get an extension and they can't leave the country, Immigration New Zealand has said that they can at least try and find work here if they can find someone who will assist them or, sponsor them or what have you. So I asked the minister if this was as far as he's going to go. He said that no, there's going to be further tweaks between now and the election. But for now, this is really just a short-term measure. But it's better than nothing, and it gives some people some certainty, employers, and certainly the skilled temporary workforce in New Zealand.
Okay, interesting development.
Yeah, and I was going to say I spoke with him about his philosophy. If we have some time, perhaps we can hear what he had to say.
Look, we've got to take into consideration what the impact of our decisions will have on New Zealanders' ability to get into work, and that we took the time to be certain that making these changes wouldn't have an unnecessarily negative impact on New Zealanders' ability to get into work. I appreciate this is something that people have been looking out for some time, but I think what we've been able to do is take the time to get the decision right so that people have plenty of time to plan for the future.
And that's the Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway. Now, for the rest of the news from the business team.
Yeah, market.
We had the market. Look, I'll tell you what, we're just rocketing up there. Another 3.25% rise in the NZX Top 50, an 88-point gain to 11,744. So that's really close to our record, which is just over...
I was going to say, you must be touching, just nosing up to the record.
Yeah, we're nosing up there because we're, 12,100 and some number. Yeah, not far off, really. Asian, the New Zealand dollar is steady at 65.5 US cents, 94.1 Australian, 52.4. And for Asia, the stocks there took a bit of a breather, wondering what's going to happen with COVID. Economy, the usual.
Words escape you, Nona.
That's it.
That's Nona Peltier with our business news. Look, and we have a further development to Hamish Walker's, I suppose you'd call it a confession, that he is the person who leaked the information to the press which contained private information about active COVID-19 cases. We have another statement. This one is from Michelle Bogue, the former president of the National Party. And the statement says, "Today I am announcing that I am the person who passed on details of current COVID-19 cases to Clutha Southland MP Hamish Walker, who then passed on that information to a number of media outlets. The information was made available to me in my position as then acting CEO of the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust, although it was sent to my private email address. This is a massive error of judgment on my part, and I apologise to my colleagues at ARHT, whom I have let down badly." Michelle Bogue goes on to say, "I very much regret my actions and did not anticipate that Hamish would choose to send it on to some media outlets. But I'm grateful that the media involved have chosen not to publish the 18 names that were contained within it. I take full responsibility for my actions and have resigned as acting CEO of Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust, which is in very good hands as the result of a recent restructure and the appointment of a new CEO for the Trust's operations and the appointment of a general manager to oversee the Trust's marketing and fundraising operations." Now, this is a fast-moving situation, so just to recap, so you've got it clear in your heads. Hamish Walker has apologised for the fact that he released information about COVID-19 patients, current COVID cases, with their private details to the media. It turns out that Michelle Bogue, the former president of the National Party, is the person who gave those details to MP Hamish Walker. And it seems that she got them from her privileged position as acting CEO of the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust. We're trying to get hold of any of these people to see if they will come on and answer the number of questions that it raises. And it appears that Michelle Bogue has declined to come on the show. We'll keep trying with the others and let you know how we go. Right, let's move on now. And just under 5 million people in Victoria are bracing for strict rules with the announcement this evening that the entire metropolitan area of Melbourne will be locked down for the next 6 weeks. Premier Dan Andrews is reimposing Stage 3 restrictions, preventing Victorians from leaving their homes for any purpose other than work, food, exercise or medical care. It's basically the same as our lockdown level 4. There are 191 new cases of COVID-19 in the state today. The news comes as locals in key border towns with New South Wales prepare for chaos as a strict state border closure comes into force at midnight tonight. Hundreds of troops and police officers are on their way to Australia's busiest border, threatening fines and jail terms. But with the website for exemption permits still not live, one mayor says he has a quick fix that would solve a whole lot of trouble, but no one's asking him. Alex Perrottet has the latest.
The Australian federal government has supported the call to close off over 4,500 kilometres of border in a bid to contain a growing wave of COVID-19 cases in Melbourne. There were 191 new cases today. Locals are bracing for confusion, congestion and chaos. New South Wales Police Minister David Elliott says it will be messy.
The next 72 hours, people are going to be confused, communities are going to be upset, local businesses are going to be interrupted.
And he's warning people who don't need to cross over to stay home.
There will be a significant military and police operation going on to monitor all cross-border activity. Yes, there are serious fines and indeed a jail sentence to anybody that wants to push the envelope.
650 police officers, 100 Defence Force members on the ground and another 250 arriving by the weekend. Drones in the sky, boats in the river, dirt bikes on the bush tracks. 5 major highways will be considered Tier A crossings, where heavy resources will be deployed. But it's the Category B roads with a smaller police presence in place that's causing local consternation. Anna Speedy is the mayor of Wodonga and says she wasn't consulted about the plans. She says there's 100,000 people in Albury and Wodonga who don't see a border, and there's 10 to 16,000 local car movements a day across that local border road.
That's just localised traffic. That's people moving between the two cities as they conduct businesses and as they go about their lives. We share a cross-border health, in terms of a hospital is located in Albury, but yet if you have your baby, you have it in Wodonga. So there's some real logistics that need to be gotten around, and we need to understand how that's going to impact our community.
She says she hasn't seen any detail yet about how it will work, despite the closure taking place at midnight tonight.
Look, I guess my worst fear is congestion, chaos and, fear of the community in the two cities.
Police Commissioner Mick Fuller says people in Albury and Wodonga will be exempt, but they will still have to prove it with a permit obtained online.
We will make it certainly easier for those to travel across. They will need an exemption. It will more than likely just need to apply for a single exemption, and that will see them through this crisis.
There's no assurances the Service New South Wales website will be able to churn out 100,000 permits by midnight tonight. Kevin Mack is the Mayor of Albury and a former policeman. He says police would save enormous resource by setting up a border north of Albury and let those in the twin border towns travel freely across the border. He told the New South Wales Deputy Premier today it's a no-brainer.
If you're pulling over 50,000 vehicles, say 25,000 if they're going back and forward, right? 25,000 vehicles a day, that's ludicrous. Why would you stop them? If you put a checkpoint out north of the city on the freeway, and as I said, the other 2 or 3 regional roads that lead out to highways into New South Wales, you have resolved the issue.
Kevin Mack says he still hasn't been consulted on how the checkpoints will work.
I've lived in this community for 30 years, and as a policeman for 20 years, I think I've got a fair idea about traffic movements. I love this place. Let's show a bit of common sense. We listen too much to the noise. We don't listen to the people. And I think in this case, let's listen to the people and apply common sense.
Marissa Garrett is from Wodonga, but she's currently on holiday in northern New South Wales. She might be away from all the troubles, but she's 34 weeks pregnant, and her doctor is in Albury, and so is her church and her kids' school. She doesn't know whether to stay put or to pack up and head home.
We have a caravan, so that shouldn't be a problem. I mean, if worst came to worst, we had to do a lockdown in New South Wales for a while. That would be a bit awkward, but I'm sure we'll find something if that happens. But look, if things really do get a bit crazy, we have sense enough to say, okay, we better pack up and head back home because, it's going to be a bit difficult. So we're just watching and waiting and just kind of playing it by ear for now.
From all reports, so are the authorities. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
It's 12 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We've been bringing you developments this evening around the leak of COVID-19 patient details. Turns out that Hamish Walker, the National MP, is responsible for that leak, and the information was leaked to him from Michelle Bogue, the former president of the National Party. She had access to it through her position at the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust. Some of you getting in touch about that. One listener says Michelle Bogue and Hamish Walker not part of the team of 5 million. John says, Hamish Walker, the talk was that an intentional disclosure of this health information was potentially a criminal act. He needs to consider his position. What is it about the men who occupy this safe national seat? They consider themselves above the law. That's obviously a reference to Todd Barclay, who used to be in that seat. And this person says Muller needs to show some spine and sack Walker from the National Party. He has brought it and Parliament into disrepute. Lack of judgment caused huge anguish to the affected people in quarantine. Let us know what your thoughts are on that. Text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Incidentally, Michelle Bogue has refused to be interviewed on the program this evening. Hamish Walker appears to have turned his phone off, and we're trying to get a hold of the National Party leader, Todd Muller. The Southern DHB is pushing for Dunedin and Invercargill to be used for managed isolation ahead of Queenstown due to concerns about its lack of medical facilities. The DHB has been meeting today to discuss plans by the government to expand its facilities to the bottom of the South Island. It says there isn't the medical care available in the resort town, but the government's not ruling Queenstown out of the running just yet. Tess Brunton has more.
Today, the Southern DHB's Chief Executive, Chris Fleming, told board members the government is well aware of their preference list. He says Queenstown would face added pressure if additional medical care was needed because it lacks tertiary or secondary hospital facilities.
The hotel accommodation is clearly easily available in Queenstown, but it's a backup other health infrastructure. And it's not so much COVID I'm worried about because there will be COVID positive people in that isolation group. It's the fact that a lot of the people returning now have other complexities associated with their ongoing health.
The Rees Hotel Queenstown's Chief Executive, Mark Rose, isn't keen to have his accommodation turned into an isolation facility, but says the issue runs deeper than that.
The lack of medical facilities in Queenstown is a big problem, and it's a bigger problem than just COVID-19. It's something we really do have to address. I think it's far better that these facilities are set up in places with major hospitals because we want to ensure everybody's safety, both people who are quarantined and the general public.
Queenstown Lakes Mayor Jim Bolt says the DHB's wish list doesn't make it a done deal, but he's pleased to hear the feedback.
I think that's an entirely sensible recommendation. This has nothing to do with whether we want or don't want isolation cases in the district. It simply recognises the very limited hospital facilities that we have.
He says it would be common sense to set up facilities in Dunedin or Invercargill.
If there was an outbreak of COVID-19 in the district, the reality is that those concerned would need to be taken to either Dunedin or Invercargill because of the risk of infection to others in the hospital. So I guess the logical thing is, if it's possible, isolate folk in Dunedin or Invercargill.
Dunedin Mayor Aaron Hawkins isn't surprised by the priority list, saying the southern city is well placed for healthcare.
These are New Zealanders who are returning home, and we have an obligation to look after them when they're here, and that means making sure that they have access to the best healthcare that they can if they need it while they are here in managed isolation.
He's already received positive feedback over recent days about managed isolation and says the city is prepared to do its bit to support returning New Zealanders.
I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise given the fact that the city became a former refugee resettlement location based on the back of a community push to do that, to help people who are escaping from fairly horrific circumstances overseas. So it doesn't surprise me then that this community would be equally supportive of looking after our own citizens.
Mr Hawkins wants to know more details about the isolation process and how risks will be contained so residents are kept safe. Health Minister Chris Hipkins isn't ruling Queenstown out of the mix, but says the presence of public health teams will factor into the government's decision.
Never say never. What Dr Woods and Economist Webb are looking for at the moment is speed. So they're obviously looking to set up managed isolation and quarantine facilities in areas where they can do so quickly. But with the passage of time, it may well be that there are a range of additional facilities that may be pressed into use, including potentially ones in Queenstown.
Invercargill's Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council and Great South declined or were unavailable for comment. Megan Woods, the Minister in charge of quarantine and isolation facilities, is expected to visit the Southern District in the coming weeks to consider hotel options. For Checkpoint, Ko Tess Brunton, tēnei.
The Islamic Women's Council says last year's mosque attacks may never have happened if the government listened to its concerns about rising hostility towards Muslims. The council has publicly released part of their submissions to the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the Christchurch mosque attacks, a move it says sets a standard of transparency for the inquiry. The commission due to hand its report to the Governor-General at the end of the month. Our reporter Annika Smith and cameraman Simon Rogers filed this report.
After years of advocacy, months of writing and a lifetime of personal experiences as Muslim women in New Zealand, the Islamic Women's Council is sure of one thing.
It is our opinion that the attack was preventable and that had our warnings been heeded, there would have been support on the steps of the mosque on March 15th.
That's Aliyah Danzaisen of the Islamic Women's Council. She's part of a group of women who work together to formulate submissions to the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the March attacks. The commission isn't due to hand its report to the Governor-General until the end of the month, but the council says now a criminal trial is off the table. It wants transparency and accountability.
We had hoped the trial would allow for that information to come out. And as a result, with the trial and with the Royal Commission yet pending, this will give the opportunity, if there are other people out there who also were waiting, it will give them opportunities to raise their hand and say, yes, we also had these concerns, or we did this as well.
The Islamic Women's Council's 170-page submission outlines its interactions with a host of government agencies in recent years. It also documents years of threats, including a post on the Waikato Muslim Association's Facebook group on February 20th, 2019, just shy of a month before the Christchurch shootings. In the post, a man wrote a copy of the Quran would be burnt outside the Hamilton Mosque on March 15, the day the Christchurch gunmen entered the Al Noor and Linwood mosques. It was reported to the police, who found the message originated in Christchurch, but later concluded it was not connected to the mosque shootings. Lawyer Frances Joychild QC says the fact Muslim women wear hijabs mean they bear the brunt of public abuse. She helped the women compile their submissions and remains in awe of their tenacity and in shock at how aptly their experiences documented a rising tide of Islamophobia in New Zealand and paralleled disinterest from the state.
I just felt sickened, absolutely sickened, because they were faced again and again with a public service that was inept and ineffective and at best disinterested. Now, it wasn't as though these women just were dealing with people at a low level, a local level. They went right to the top of a number of government departments.
Aliyah Danzaisen says the council repeatedly warned the government about their safety concerns. She says global events over the years escalated an othering of the Muslim community, not helped by the then Prime Minister Sir John Key in December 2015.
John Key further reinforced this othering by asserting that jihadi brides were leaving from New Zealand. Female Muslims were immediately harassed thereafter, as all of New Zealand should now know that was actually not true.
Mr Key denied scaremongering at the time, but the Islamic Women's Council says it's important he now owns up to his comments they say caused a spike in hostility towards Muslim women. RNZ contacted Mr Key in light of the fresh call for a public apology, but did not hear back from him. Anjum Rahman says it's time public officials took responsibility for their words, actions and inaction.
It is time for all of our government departments to be upfront and be honest about any of their failings.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says that's not her call.
That's not a judgment I can make. Only individuals, I think, who are being asked can make that judgment. So I would leave that for Mr Key.
The council says while it's noticed genuine warmth from the public since the March attacks, the abuse hasn't stopped. It says the shootings that shocked the world have at the same time emboldened some people, and it's their lingering concern over this that drives the women onwards. They're asking New Zealanders take the time to read their submissions and join them in demanding transparency and accountability from the government too. Mo te hōtaka o te yahi nei, ko Annika Smith aho.
RNZ still hasn't heard from Sir John Key since approaching him earlier today. We remain open to speaking to him. Let's get to some of your feedback now, and this is on this, developing story, which is Hamish Walker, who has confessed to being the person behind the link of those COVID-19 patient details, aided by Michelle Bogue, who passed the information on to him. She's the former National Party president. She got access through her Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust position. Gary says he should be gone by lunchtime if Mola follows his advice on Dr. Clark. Edwin has got in touch to say shoddy, shabby, shambolic, schmozzle, deliberate too, leaking that shows no ethic or compassion. Someone else says they both should be charged for criminal acts breaching the Privacy Act. This is appalling behaviour and undermines all the efforts of Team 5 Million in managing our borders. They have tried to undermine trust. They are a disgrace. And John has got in touch to say Michelle Bogue and Hamish Walker ought to be arrested and charged for a crime. And this one says Michelle Bogue's admission changes nothing. Both have breached the Privacy Act.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. National MP Hamish Walker has confessed to leaking the private details of people infected with COVID-19 to the media. And in a further twist, former National Party President Michelle Bogue has admitted sending the information to the Clutha Southland MP. RNZ and 2 other news outlets have reported seeing the names, addresses and location of the 18 people in quarantine last week after testing positive for the coronavirus. Ms Bogue says the information was sent to her private email in her role as the acting chief executive of the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust, and she then sent it to Mr Walker. She says it was a massive error of judgment and has resigned from the trust. Mr Walker says he will cooperate fully with the independent inquiry announced by the government. Both Mr Walker and Ms Bogue have apologised for leaking the information. Air New Zealand hasn't ruled out the possibility of extending a 3-week freeze on bookings for passengers wanting to come home to New Zealand so the government can cope with increasing demand on isolation facilities. There's capacity for over 6,800 people in 26 managed isolation and quarantine facilities across 5 cities, but pressure is going on those resources. And Minister Megan Woods says the system can't purely be demand-driven. Emirates and Singapore Airlines are also being asked to stop taking bookings over the same period of time. Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran told Checkpoint they agreed to 3-week booking freeze for ethical reasons.
I was asked to do that to help the New Zealand government as they're dealing with managed isolation, and as I think about that request and I think about what's right for New Zealand, I think it's a pretty simple decision for us to get in there and provide the right support.
Greg Foran of Air New Zealand. Support is mounting for Dunedin and Invercargill to be used for managed isolation ahead of Queenstown. Last week, the government announced it was looking at the resort town and Dunedin as potential destinations for managed isolation facilities. Today, the Southern DHB confirmed Queenstown is last on its preference list due to concerns about its lack of medical facilities. The Reese Hotel Queenstown's chief executive Mark Rose says it's a common sense approach.
It just makes complete sense to me when we just don't have the hospital facilities. We struggle during the ski season with injuries on the mountain. So if we had a big outbreak and had a bunch of cases become serious, we'd have to look to be able to transport them to Invercargill or Dunedin anyway. So it makes a lot more sense that that's where they start out.
Mark Rose, a Queenstown hotel owner. Melbourne has been ordered into lockdown for 6 weeks. From tomorrow night, people will be unable to leave their homes for any reason other than work, food, exercise or medical care. A record 191 new daily cases in Victoria were announced earlier today, bringing the total number of active cases in the state to nearly 800. The Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews says lockdown is necessary and a hard boundary will need to be set around metropolitan Melbourne.
These are unsustainably high numbers of new cases. It is simply impossible with case rates at this level to have enough contact tracing staff, to have enough physical resources, no matter where they come from, no matter what uniform they wear, in order to continue to suppress and contain this virus without taking significant steps.
Daniel Andrews says a lockdown will hopefully prevent a tragedy. The New Zealand First MP Shane Jones is rejecting accusations he influenced the outcome of a report saying ports of Auckland should shift to Northland. Another report released today recommends moving the port south to Manukau or the Firth of Thames. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff backs those findings, saying the earlier report favouring a shift north was a shoddy opinion piece not based on facts. The Transport Minister agrees, saying it had a predetermined outcome overseen by Shane Jones. Mr Jones says that's not true.
The report showed an engagement with over 80 stakeholders, all skilled in port logistics, transport logistics, integrated logistics. Any suggestion that it was written on the back of a cigarette paper, I think is grossly disrespectful.
MP Shane Jones. Some temporary workers have been given more time to live and work in New Zealand. Visas held by people on essential skills and work to residence visas that are due to expire by the end of this year have been given an extra 6 months. Hospitality New Zealand Chief Executive Julie White says the extension won't help nearly 200,000 temporary workers on visitor and other types of work visas.
I think what's going to happen with the people who are falling through the cracks, they're not going to have an option. They are essentially going to have to leave the country and go home. But we understand there's going to be a high unemployment and we really do need to look after Kiwis. So it's a balancing act.
Julie White of Hospitality New Zealand. Any new visas issued for low-skilled workers will be scaled back to a maximum of 6 months rather than 1 year. It's coming up to 5.5 minutes past 6. Warriors halfback Blake Green insists he's moved on from the disappointment of the public airing of his departure from the NRL club and is open to playing at a 9th professional rugby league club. Green turned in a match-winning performance for the Warriors in the weekend's win over Brisbane just days after he was told his contract would not be renewed. While he accepted the club's decision, he was annoyed Warriors owner Mark Robinson announced his impending departure and that of teammate Gerard Beale in a television interview.
Yeah, it was a big few days for me. I just tried to put that to the side. I did the best I could to just focus on the game, put in a performance for the team because, our teams faced a heap of obstacles as well. It wasn't a personal thing.
Blake Green. The Southern Steel shooter Georgia Heffernan will be out of netball for the rest of the year after rupturing knee ligaments in her side's recent ANZ Premiership match against the Northern Stars. Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs have agreed to a 10-year contract extension through 2031 in what has been reported as a record deal. Terms of the deal were not disclosed, but ESPN says it's worth more than $600 million and is the richest contract in NFL history. The US Women's National Basketball Association says teams will wear uniforms bearing the names of black female victims of police brutality and racial violence during the league's opening weekend. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Guy and Espina presents the final of the series After the Virus. Tonight, Society. Is COVID-19 changing it forever? We welcome the return of Song Crush with new host Tony Stamp. Excited about music from Beyonce, Glass Animals, among others. And Brian Easton ponders our current economic situation, somewhere between a rock and a hard place, I suspect, on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northlands to Taranaki, Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Showers, some heavy, possible squally thunderstorms tomorrow, easing in the evening. Gale westerlies for a time tomorrow from Auckland to Waitomo and Western Bay of Plenty. For the remainder of the North Island, showers, mainly west of the ranges. Rain spreading north tomorrow with snow lowering to 700 metres inland and some heavy falls about the east coast. Easing to a few showers by evening, but showers remaining persistent about the wider upper coast. For Bulla, Westland, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, occasional showers gradually clearing tomorrow but persisting about Banks Peninsula. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, showers possibly heavy at times, snow lowering to 300 metres for a time overnight. Chatham Islands, rain easing to a few showers. RNZ National, 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. National's Clutha Southland MP, Hamish Walker, has confirmed he leaked the personal details of COVID-19 patients to the media. Former National Party President and acting CEO of the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust, Michelle Bogue, has resigned from her role after declaring she passed on the details to Mr Walker. RNZ was one of 3 media outlets that received the information from Mr Walker. The leaking of the details is subject to a State Services Commission inquiry being led by Queen's Counsel Michael Heron. Our political reporter Joe Moyer joins us now live from Parliament with this unfolding story. Joe, there has been an absolute flurry of press statements tonight, so let's start with the latest. Who's saying what?
Yeah, there certainly has been a flurry, Lisa. So we'll start with Hamish Walker, the MP for Clutha Southland. Now, he's informed his leader, Todd Muller, that he was responsible for the leak of these personal details. He says he gave it to the media to expose the government's shortcomings. He says the information wasn't password protected, nor was it stored on a secure system. He says he basically shared it because he hopes that the government's protocols will improve as a result of this. Now, he's apologised for how he handled that information, and he's obviously apologised to those COVID-19 patients whose details he shared with the media. And he says that he will fully cooperate with the QC Michael Heron inquiry that's going on. Now, not long after that, we received a press statement from Todd Muller, the leader. He has stripped Hamish Walker of his forestry, land information and associate tourism portfolios, and he has asked Hamish Walker to contact Michael Heron and to cooperate fully with that inquiry. Michelle Bogue then came into play with her press statement. Now, she's confirmed that she passed the information on to Hamish Walker after receiving it on her personal email. Now, she says that was a massive error of judgment and she's apologised. Now, she's the acting CEO of the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust, and she says that she's resigned from that role and she's apologised to her colleagues and says this doesn't reflect on the trust at all. It was very much her own personal act. She says she didn't expect that Hamish would pass the information on to media outlets, and as I say, is very apologetic and says that it's about her and nothing to do with the helicopter trust.
Okay, Joe, let's take a step back. How did this leak come to light and how did it unfold before we got to this point?
So we're going back now to Saturday. Now on Saturday we saw RNZ, the Herald and Stuff all run stories saying that they'd received information. Now the details that they had received included names, ages, addresses and the quarantine locations of where these 18 COVID active cases had stayed. Now those 18 cases were up to last week. So that information was published that there had been a leak. However, none of the media outlets including RNZ, did anything with those personal details or published any of those personal details. The State Services Minister Chris Hipkins got involved very quickly over the weekend and said that he was looking to launch an inquiry. Now, he announced yesterday that the QC Michael Heron would be investigating and that he wanted it done very quickly and that he would be reporting back to the State Services Minister by the end of this month, so about 3 weeks' time. Mr Hipkins said that it was a very serious breach from what he could see, and he did say that it could possibly result in criminal charges at the time.
It's really interesting, the timing of the press statements, given that Michael Heron was appointed yesterday and is a well-known investigator and has done some really high-profile cases, for them all of a sudden to come forward and confess what they have done. So what happens now, Joe?
So, I mean, we still have this inquiry and there still are some questions to be answered. So from here, you'd expect that Hamish Walker and Michelle Bogue will cooperate with the inquiry and be interviewed by Michael Heron. Now, bear in mind, Michelle Bogue, in that role with the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust, she would be privy to that sort of information, but the interesting part from her press statement is that she received it through her personal email address. So there will be questions about how she received that information, why she received it in that way, and of course then passing it on to Hamish Walker. Now, I have contacted the State Services Minister's Chris Hipkins' office. He hasn't got a statement at this time. He's tied up at the moment, but obviously he's going to have a decision to make as well, as this has all got very political now, and it will be a case of whether he just completely leaves it to Michael Heron to deal with or whether he decides to get involved in the politics of it.
Thanks, Joe. That is Joe Moyer just updating us on the situation there. We're following the news from Hamish Walker, the National MP, that he is the source of the leak of that COVID-19 patient information with the assistance of Michelle Bogue. While Checkpoint has calls in to Hamish Walker, Todd Muller and Nikki Kay, But strangely, none of them are answering their phones. Michelle Bogue has spoken to us, but she's declined to be interviewed. To the other breaking news story this evening, Melbourne is going into lockdown from tomorrow night for 6 weeks. A short time ago, the Victorian Premier, Daniel Andrews, spoke following high-level meetings today with health officials. He said the time to stop the state's outbreak is now.
We do have a chance to change that in the decisions we all make, in the way we conduct ourselves, in the way we reset. And that is why the public health team have advised me to reimpose stage 3 stay-at-home restrictions, staying at home except for the 4 reasons to leave, effective from midnight tomorrow night for a period of 6 weeks.
Now, stage 3 restrictions mean 5 million people cannot leave their homes for any reason other than work, food, exercise or medical care. Victoria has experienced its worst day since the pandemic began. 191 new cases were announced. That's a big increase on the 127 new cases announced yesterday and brings the total number of active cases in the state to close to 800. Daniel Andrews says the state needs to be realistic about the problem.
These are unsustainably high numbers of new cases. It is simply impossible with case rates at this level to have enough contact tracing staff, to have enough physical resources, no matter where they come from, no matter what uniform they wear, in order to continue to suppress and contain this virus without taking significant steps. If we were to fail to take those steps, then it won't be a couple of hundred cases per day, it will be many more than that, and it will quickly spiral well and truly out of control.
Meanwhile, food and other essential supplies have been delivered to Melbourne tower blocks as about 3,000 people endure a forced day in lockdown. There have already been 69 positive cases reported from the 9 public housing blocks. But residents in those buildings, including Dima Abdul, are still unhappy about being kept in the dark.
I'm very worried about the lack of communication, especially when it concerns us and we're not being notified. Our building at 33 Alfred has received a letter saying that it's not for 5 days, it's 14 days. And if we refuse testing, there'll be an extra 10 days. And we would like more mental health support, more social workers, because I haven't seen any, to be honest. And we want more, at least door-to-door or calls going out to people, because I did hear there are people really, really suffering and isolated, potentially also young mothers who also don't understand English or understand why they feel like they're being criminalised.
Later tonight, the Victorian-New South Wales border will close for the first time in 100 years. Police will be based at dozens of sites to stop people from crossing the Murray River. It is almost 17 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A freeze on Air New Zealand flights coming back into the country is expected to affect thousands of Kiwis trying to get home over the coming weeks. The airline and the government have agreed to put new bookings on hold for 3 weeks to take the pressure off managed isolation facilities. Those who already have bookings could have their flights delayed, and National says the booking freeze breaches New Zealanders' rights to come home. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever with the details.
There has been a surge in New Zealanders flying home in recent weeks. Of the 27,000 New Zealanders who have arrived in managed isolation since March, more than 7,500 have been in the past 3 weeks alone. The Minister in charge of isolation facilities, Megan Woods, says the extra passengers are putting pressure on the system.
It is absolutely every New Zealander's right to come home, but it is also every New Zealander's right to feel that the government is managing isolation in a way that protects them. So making sure that we're carefully matching capacity of inflow and outflow is something that we will always take seriously.
There are more than 5,700 people in managed isolation and quarantine right now. The capacity is just under 6,400. But Megan Woods stresses space isn't going to run out.
We have data from the airlines around who is coming back. This is exactly why we've taken this measure, so that we can ensure that our managed isolation facilities continue to be a strong line of defence at our borders.
Air New Zealand flights account for about 80% of those flying into the country, but officials are also speaking with the two other airlines flying into the country, Emirates and Singapore Airlines, to introduce similar booking freezes. Megan Wood says those who already have tickets will still be able to fly. However, Air New Zealand's Chief Commercial and Customer Officer, Cam Wallace, is warning hundreds of passengers could face delays.
It looks likely that the impact won't be this week, but if we look at our demand forecast, we've probably got too many customers booked in week 2 and week 3.
Cam Wallace says all affected customers will be spoken to in the next week or so. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the decision was made to make sure the facilities can continue to be well run.
We are bringing on more capacity. We've continued to grow another 2,000 places in a short space of time. We'll keep doing that, but it's just about managing that flow in what can be a highly volatile situation. We have people showing up at airports, and it's by the time they close the doors, that's when we'll get a heads up that we have an extra 100 people coming that weren't planned for.
But Nationals leader Todd Muller says today's decision breaches New Zealanders' right to come home.
If the border had not been managed so shambolically over the last few weeks, then they wouldn't be under the pressure that they clearly are in terms of identifying the appropriate managed isolation facilities and being able to have space for returning Kiwis. New Zealanders, if they want to come home, should be able to come home, full stop.
The government is looking at other locations for isolation facilities this week, including Queenstown and Dunedin, to increase capacity. But it isn't ruling out further measures to limit demand in the future. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
Community sport and national leagues are the major winners from the first tranche of funding announced today from the government's $265 million sport recovery package. $68 million is going into community sport and $25.5 million to national sports organisations, with $5.5 million of that helping prop up the running of national competitions. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
Tū Manawa Active Aotearoa is a fund aimed at getting those living in high deprivation areas active. It gets the bulk of funding from today's announcement, $68 million, which includes $34 million Sport New Zealand already puts into the Kiwi Sport regional program. Sports Minister Grant Robertson says the pandemic's taken a toll on people taking part in sport and in being active.
This is a really important program in the regions of New Zealand and schools and for young people to make sure that they can stay active. Many of the people we'll be targeting through this extension are people who have not been able to participate in sport and active recreation since COVID-19 as a result particularly of our economic circumstances.
$25.5 million will go to national sports groups, $5 million of which will help fund the running of national leagues, with the rest aimed at propping up national sports organisations financially. It's on top of a $4.5 million bailout professional sport received last month, which went to Netball New Zealand to keep the ANZ Premiership League afloat, the Warriors to help them in the NRL, the Wellington Phoenix in the A-League, and also to Super Rugby. Basketball missed out on funding then, which left Basketball New Zealand chair Ian Potter frustrated. The sport's now received $500,000 in today's announcement, which will go towards the NBL, much to Potter's relief.
You know, it's 3 weeks in, it's a really competitive league, but it has been under financial pressure and we have been funding it with some of the reserves available, and so this just takes that pressure away. And for the Women's League, it makes it possible because we wouldn't have been able to get the Women's League up if we hadn't received funding.
Sport New Zealand Chief Executive Peter Miskimmins says the payouts for national leagues range from $70,000 to $300,000. It means the likes of Rugby's Mitre 10 Cup and the Farah Palmer Cup, the domestic men's and women's rugby league competitions, and Netball's national provincial amateur competition can now go ahead. Longer term, Miskimmins says Sport New Zealand will meet with national sports bodies to discuss how they can future-proof themselves.
We're going to announce a number of partners that we want to initially work with, a small group, so we want to test it. And so clearly this sort of change, it's change management, so it requires cultural change, structural change. It's quite complex and difficult. And then we'll look at how we need to invest or support them, resource them. But we wouldn't see money flowing from that for a fair while yet until we figure out what the plan is.
Today's funding announcement also sees $7 million earmarked for improving facilities for New Zealand's upcoming hosting of World Cups, including the Women's Cricket World Cup and the Women's Rugby World Cup. Sports Minister Grant Robertson says this funding's on top of money already committed to the tournaments by the government through its Major Events Fund.
We don't actually have that many bathroom and changing facilities for women in a lot of our sporting facilities in New Zealand, and given that we're hosting Women's World Cups, we think it's important that we do that.
There's more funding too for sports clubs through the Community Resilience Fund, which initially supported over 1,600 local and 300 regional organisations. But the payout amounts were limited to $1,000 for clubs and $40,000 for regional groups. The new fund will be $10 million, with clubs now able to apply for up to $25,000. Gordon Noble-Campbell of the New Zealand Amateur Sports Association says this appears a much better approach.
It's a huge contribution, but the real question is how it will actually find its way to where it's needed. I mean, with the first round of funding, feedback that came back from the grassroots is that it was too hard to apply for it. I think there was $15 million, I think something like that, was made available through the Resilience Fund. A lot of clubs and organisations didn't bother to apply simply because there were too many hoops and hurdles to get through to get your hands on what was, at the end of the day, not a large sum of money.
Gordon Noble-Campbell says having sport back up and running is a major boost, and sports clubs can play a leading hand in working with a wide range of agencies to provide employment and greater social interaction. For Checkpoint, Stephen Hewson.
Well, finally tonight, a Checkpoint listener, Keith, got in touch yesterday lamenting the deficit of good news in the world right now. So this one is for you, Keith. Now, do stick with it because, spoiler alert, it does have a happy ending. Matamata locals have been desperately trying to rescue a curious and possibly greedy local cat that went all Winnie the Pooh on it and got its head firmly stuck in a peanut butter jar. Now, that was about 2 weeks ago. Since then, the distressed moggy has been seen darting all over the place with the, jar still in place, and locals in hot pursuit, concerned that after so long without food or proper access to water, the cat was getting to the end of its 9 lives. Annalise England from the Matamata Animal Trust explains just how tight a squeeze this tabby was in.
He's pretty small. He's an older cat, but there would have been very minimal air going in between the rim and his neck, so it was right over his head past his ears. So I'm surprised that he could actually breathe. He would have barely been able to breathe. So, of course, he couldn't eat or drink.
So, and it was beyond the point of return for him being able to, weasel his way out of there on his own.
Yeah. And I would say he'd tried everything. And, of course, because it was plastic and not glass, it's not like it would have smashed on anything. He would have ended up dying that way if no one had actually caught him.
So you track him to this particular area, and then what? How did you manage to capture him?
Well, so we were setting traps and stuff, but of course he couldn't smell, so he wasn't going to go into a trap. People were getting very close to catching him, but he just kept darting off, and because it's such a tight area, he'd go under fences, and then you'd lose sight of him. So last Friday, we completely lost him, and we thought, that's it, And then yesterday, which was Monday, he got spotted out 3 k's from where we're even searching. So he was heading out to the country. Through fields and everything, he got spotted running across the road into someone else's property. So we headed out there, and he was sheltering in a sort of a bush area, which then we barricaded it off and ended up catching him with a pole, because I had to come from over the top of him to put a rope on his neck to safely catch him and put him in his cage. And there was no way we were letting him out of that cat cage, because this cat's the whole of Matamata's been looking for this cat.
So Annalise, tell me, how does one prise a peanut butter jar off the head of a fully grown cat?
So I took him down to the vets straight away, and they sedated him I think they ended up cutting it off. And then, of course, when he's sedated and relaxed, it is a lot easier to get it off rather than them fighting and, putting up a resistance. So, it did come off, but he definitely enjoyed his food and water last night while recovering.
I bet. What did he have? What did he have for tea?
I think the vets would have fed him some pretty good food. It would have been something sensitive for his stomach, because after not eating for so long, you've got to be careful that you don't actually just flood them with food.
And is he in good spirits?
Yeah. He's pretty. His head is pretty. What would you say? Like he's got rubbing on the ears and stuff from being in it, which is expected. And he's of course very thin from not being able to eat or drink. But he in generally is in good health. He's an older cat, so seems to be fine. He's a little bit skittery, but I think he's calmer today than what he was yesterday. So I think over time he will become, quite friendly.
Do you rehome him now, Annalise?
Yeah, so we will go through the protocol of holding on to him and seeing if there is an owner around or, that has possibly missed him. I mean, some cats go missing for years. But if no one comes forward or we don't find anyone, then he will be rehomed. There's already people that want him in Matamata. So he'll go to a foster home tomorrow to recuperate and then get some love and then get rehomed.
So, what are you calling him, Annalise?
Well, we've decided to call him Peanut because he was in a peanut butter jar. So yes, his name is Peanut, and I think he's ended up pretty famous around town.
So there you go, Keith, some good news about Peanut. Well, on another point, Checkpoint has been calling Southland MP Hamish Walker throughout the program today, but his phone is going straight to message.
You've almost reached Hamish. The quickest way to get in touch with me is to contact one of my officers, otherwise leave your name and number, and I'll get back in touch with you as soon as I can.
At the tone, record your message.
There you have it. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The National MP Hamish Walker has admitted leaking the private details of people infected with COVID-19 to the media after the party's former president sent him the information. Hundreds of Defence Force troops will enforce a boundary around metropolitan Melbourne as it enters a 6-week COVID-19 lockdown tomorrow. And the head of Air New Zealand says a decision to put a halt on inbound flights for 3 weeks was the right way to support the government's managed isolation system. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7, then it's Nights with Brian Crump.
The Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra is back in the concert hall with a star pianist and a world premiere. Michael Huston performs Beethoven's First Piano Concerto, and composer John Sarthis premieres his fanfare for the team of 5 million. This special concert is already sold